I came into the league in 1967. That makes that about 53 years ago. I retired in 1980, so that's like 40 years ago. So we're talking some time back, and believe me, over that 40 or 53-year period of time, many things have changed in the National Football Leagues. Obviously, many things have changed in the United States. We're still working on a few very important ones, obviously, from
yes,
from
we
what
are.
just happened in the last 3 or 4 months surrounding police, systemic injustices, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, the league, professional football has changed in many, many ways, starting with drafting. I was a 12th round draft choice. They don't have 12 rounds anymore. They only have 7 rounds. In terms of player size, which is a huge factor in the whole progression of player capabilities. I'm talking about size. I'm talking about speed, quickness, intelligence, the ability to have the internet, iPads on the sideline,
Right.
to see what the defenses are doing on the spot at the moment. You can actually see what they just did on the. We didn't have any of those kinds of things. We didn't really.
You were lucky to get Fame Film next week, right?
That's right. We really didn't have what you nowadays you call workout facilities. I can't remember when I came into the league in '67 with the Baltimore Colts, if we had a weight room. I don't think we had one back then.
Right.
You walk into any training camp now, training facility now, the weight rooms are like schools. They're like small colleges. They're so huge. They've got everything imaginable in terms of ability to train. Sorry about
even
that.
Down to high school. That's okay. That's right. Even down to high school and junior high.
It's all changed. The players have so much available to them to get better, be better, and sustain that. That might be part of the problem that the players have too now once they get out of the game from a health standpoint. We tried to help the players of today, and we did help them quite a bit when it comes to a major factor in players today, and that's in their base salaries. You can't imagine back in our day one player making $31 million as Dak Prescott just signed a contract for. I don't think, Frank, to be honest with you, that in my 14 years of playing in the game, and, part of that you have to kind of understand that I was a 12th round draft choice. Bob Lilly, who is a Hall of Famer, all-time Dallas Cowboy player, Mr. Cowboy, if you will, didn't make much more than I did in his first contract. And my first contract was $1,500. Okay. Now, the players from back then, I was involved in 3 strikes back then. The strikes that we went on and suffered through publicity, through the owners and their attacks upon us, got the players where they are now, so that guys like Dak Prescott can be looking at a $31 million contract. I don't think I made more than $1 million in my total of 14 years in the game. So from our efforts back then, the players of today are reaping those benefits. Not to say that they don't deserve it. They certainly do. But I think, in my opinion, the players of today don't give the players from the past enough respect for
Do you
getting
think
that.
also that part of that, the growth of the league and all that, is the AFL and the WFL with the competition back in the early 60s and then in the mid 70s? Did that have something to do with the salary growth as well?
I think so. Oh yeah. When the new league headed up by guys like Joe Namath and those Jet teams from the past, Joe Namath, I think, was one of the guys that was making one of the biggest contracts from back then, and that was only like 500,000.
Right.
But that was a huge contract back then. But those guys that were in that new league coming up was competition to the established NFL, so that the price tag to get players into the NFL versus the AFL went up. So you couple that with the players like myself, I was a player representative when I went to Pittsburgh, and a number of strikes that we went on to get better contracts, better health, all of the things that the players have today. They should be kissing our rumps because we are the guys who got what they have right now for the most part.
Everybody has to pay someone to pave the road for them, right?
Yes. Now, I'm not saying these things because I'm trying to take anything away from the players today. They deserve every bit of what they get because these guys are good. I tell people who want to compare 50 years ago, 40 years ago when I played the game to the accomplishments and abilities of today's players. Let me tell you something. There's no comparison. The players of today are smarter because of some of the things I talked to you about. Coming out of college, obviously, they have a lot more opportunities to understand and know the game from college. But once they get into the pros, listen, they are so big. We did not have one guy on our entire roster, that was 300 pounds.
Right.
These guys today, up and down the lineup, offensively and or defensively, these guys are 300 pounds plus. The Cowboys offensive line back in the 90s, when Emmitt Smith was running, they averaged 340 pounds.
Right.
340 pounds in the 90s. And let me tell you this too, quickness, a guy like Nate Newton from back then at 340 pounds could beat me to the sideline. A guy like Joe Green was about maybe 275 at that time. That's kind of a defensive line backer, defensive end in today's game today. But Joe was just as quick as these guys are today. So bigger, stronger, faster, smarter. That's what these guys are today. And they deserve every bit of what the owners have to share with them.
So now, and that's what each generation is supposed to do. Sometimes we don't do it, but we make things better for the next group of people.
Yes.
But now, what have we done as far as now? What have we done to make the world better after we leave the game?
Yeah, and that's very, very important. And I think there is a difference between today's player and the player from back then, because in our quote off season, we had to go to work.
Right.
You had to find a job, just to continue paying the bills in the so-called off season. In today's game, they're making so much money from a salary standpoint, they don't have to do that. They can rely on their base salary, $31 million per year. You don't have to do a whole lot in terms of looking forward down the line. And that's one of the problems that today's players should be looking more at, especially African-American players, which what is it, 75% of the league is dominated by African-American players. I would like to see players doing a lot more during the time that they're playing while they're making a tremendous amount of money to establish what they want to be down the road. Hey, listen, you can't go out and buy 18-room houses, that a garage houses 9 cars, and sustain yourself for the rest of your life. That's going to get boring, number one. And number two, if you don't have something coming in, that amount of money going out is going to get to you sooner or later. So you got to figure out something, and you should do that while you're playing the game, while your name is still up there, and you can walk into a powerhouse company or a powerhouse individual in your community and get something done. At least you can sit down and talk with them. You know, I couldn't sit down and talk with a Ross Perot back in the day because I just didn't have that kind of power.
Right.
He would have told his people, who the hell is Preston Pearson? You know, why would I want to sit down and talk with him? But the players today, they can do that. You know, if LeBron James were to call somebody, I don't care who it is, President of the United States, they're going to know who he is, and they're going to want to sit down and talk to him, not necessarily just because he's a basketball player, and that's where the people at Fox Sports or Fox Network screwed up. They wanted him to just shut up and dribble the basketball. Well, he's more than that.
Right.
He's more than that. And that's why these big-time people with the big names, they would want to talk to him because they know he's more than that.
Now,
that's what I
so
like
do you think it's incumbent? Okay, so it's incumbent upon these people that are making these large salaries and that have this power. Is it incumbent upon them to use that for, as you were saying, social injustice, for the power they have to make the world a better place, or at least to shine a light on things?
Yes. I think it's their responsibility. And I mean that in terms of African Americans, Caucasians, Mexican American, wherever you're from, whatever your culture, whatever your race, whatever your color is, it is your responsibility as an individual, especially for African Americans. You owe it to the people who came before you, number one. You owe it to yourself and your family to do that, to stand up and be heard. I like what a lot of the players are doing today. They're standing up finally. You know, the time is now to perhaps get some of those things that has been promised to us as a culture, as a race, for a long, long period of time. But I think now, because more people of the Caucasian persuasion have finally opened their eyes, they've opened their hearts. Now is the time that those things can be accomplished. And I'm so happy to see that after the protest of George Floyd and others, many others, that those in charge or those that have the power have not dropped the ball. You got to continue, and it's going to be a hell of a fight if you keep pedal to the middle. You got to keep going.
Well, what I, being around athletics my entire life, a team functions when the team is headed in the same direction. So It seems to me that if you have been involved in athletics, and especially in teams, you know that this part can't go over here and that part can't go over there, and that should be able to be incorporated in society if you're going to lead, as you're talking about, from a position of quote-unquote power.
Agreed. And again, the players of today, because of social media is great to a certain degree. You know, some guys need to get off of social media.
Right.
But if you utilize it in the right way, you don't have to rely on reporters or the local newspaper or anything like that to get your word out. And guess what? it's an international opportunity. It's not just for
Right.
your hometown or the town that you play ball in. This is the international opportunities. You can say something and it's worldwide. And again, sometimes some people need to understand and recognize that and
Right.
get off
Get off of it.
social media.
Well, the thing is, like we're doing right now, you can see the words coming out of my mouth, and I can't refute that down the road. This is what I said. This is how I said it. And
Right.
there's no need for spin, and you don't have anyone that has to spin it. So you have to be, well, I'm going to assume, be genuine and honest and forthright in what you're saying. And if you do that and you're doing it the right way, you should get your message across.
Extremely important, and you can advertise yourself, establish your own brand, and it doesn't have to. Again, it's an opportunity to establish yourself your own way, directed by you yourself or your people. You don't have to rely on the Dallas Cowboys or the
Right.
Cleveland Browns or anybody else to help you establish yourself. Now, here's a concern that I have or have had for a long time. When you talk about any special team, any special time during their history, for example, with the Dallas Cowboys, when you talk about the successes that the Cowboys had, the Super Bowls, the great plays, there are only certain names that come up. And like Billy Joe Dupree, a former teammate of mine who lives in the area here, tight end, he was telling us a story that he was at a speaking engagement, and when the audience was talking about the Cowboys and the successes that they had, there was only 2 or 3 names that came up. You can imagine who those are: Roger Staubach, Drew Pearson, maybe a few others here or there, Randy White. But Billy Joe was saying when the name came up, it came up repeatedly from an offensive standpoint: Roger Staubach, Hail Mary, blah, 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 blah. And Billy Joe had to stop somebody and said, he didn't do it by himself.
Right.
He may have thrown the pass, but either I caught it or Dorsett ran it or Rayfield Wright made the block.
Blocked or something, right. Right.
So a player who's not getting the kind of recognition that he probably deserves at that moment, and or as in my case and others, retired players, you can establish your own identity, your own brand through the internet, if that's the direction you'd like to go.
Well,
So
that's what this forum is for. That's
exactly.
And I've reached out to Billy Joe Dupree and I haven't heard back from him yet. So, but those you are the glue, and nothing against the Roger Staubachs and the Drew Pearsons, but
Right.
like you said,
Exactly.
they didn't do anything on their own. So, and again, I'm a sports junkie, so I've been following this since I was a toddler. So the names stick in my head and what you've done, and again, now what you're doing later, because as you said, 40 years, 50 years later, that was impressive, but now what have you done with that forum or just yourself? So you could have been the star for 6 years on the team, but maybe someone else is a star in life for the next 40 years.
Exactly. And I tried
They're
to,
just as important, or more so maybe.
No question about it. That hits the nail right on the head there. I tried to, when I was playing the game, I came out of University of Illinois. I was drafted as a basketball player. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but to be drafted in the 12th round by the Baltimore Colts, a team that I love myself, that was my team. Johnny Unitas, Raymond Berry.
Yeah, right.
I was drafted the same year that Bubba Smith was drafted with the Baltimore Colts. He was the first-round draft choice. I had an opportunity to play with Bubba and those guys. Lenny Moore was one of my heroes. I tried to copy what he did, and if you think about my career, it was pretty much just
you
like
did,
Lenny
yes,
Moore.
yeah.
You know, so these guys set the example, and so I watched what they did. Big Jim Parker, Lenny Moore, they all had outside businesses. I think Big Jim had a liquor store, very popular in our community. But I watched what those guys did, not only in our meetings, but what they did with their families. And believe me, that's a huge part of African-American life, family. And those guys set the example for me on that issue. And I'm still very much in touch with my 2 sons and my 4 grandkids and their wives and their families. But guys like Lenny Moore, they set the example for me. And I started actually my second, maybe my 3rd year when I was in Baltimore, trying to figure out, sit down and establish what I wanted to be and do and have once my days in the game were over. Like I said, I started out as a basketball player. So I kind of thought in the back of my head, hey, this ain't going to last, much more than 3-4 years. Fortunately for me, it lasted 14 years, which was a surprise to a lot of people, not only myself, but to a lot of other people. But I decided that I was going to go back to school. I took some courses. I tried to sit down and plot out where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do at that time. Now, that's kind of difficult to do, to sit down and say at one point, 10 years from now, this is what I'm going to be doing. But you have to try to reach out to something that you can grab onto for the time being, so that you're not stuck in one spot. If at that time Don Shula says, we can't use you anymore.
Right.
So what do you do after that? And you can't always rely on what you did in school. Whatever your major was in school may not be what happened later on in life after that, especially if you now got a family, which I did, a wife, had a son that came along 2 years after. So some of your objectives may have changed in that process. So, but you have to do something. You have to set some sights. I don't want to say goals because that's too narrow. But you have to have something that you might be able to reach out to, maybe 2 or 3 somethings. Right. That you can turn to. So I tried to do that. And I think if I look back, that's what I did all through my career. I've done a number of things. I've owned 12 Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises with 4 or 5 other former Dallas Cowboy players. I've owned 3 Wendy's franchises that I built from the ground up by myself. We were involved in a janitorial service company. I'm now involved in trying to establish a stem cell product diversification company right now. So I've done a number of things. So objectives, goals, if you will, might change over the years, but you have to set something that you can reach out for and grab onto, that you can support your family with, number one, but make a contribution. You have to ask yourself, and this is what I've done, you have to ask yourself, why am I here?
Right. What am I doing? Right.
Yeah, well, what am I doing? What did God put me here for? Why am I here? That might help.
It's very hard to deviate from the plan if you don't have a plan.
Yes.
I've run across that myself a few times, but
there. Yes. I think the players today, they sometimes, and when I say players of today, that could go back to 20, 30 years ago. Right. And I think a problem for them is that the kind of money that's in front of him. And I would say to guys like Dak Prescott, just because you've got 31 million in the bank for 1 year,
Right.
just for
Right.
1 year, do not lose sight of the question: why am I here? It's not about money. I'll guarantee you that, because that money can't bring you love. It can't bring you satisfaction inside. It's just a thing that can bring you mostly material things.
And it might be even more important to know who you are and why you're here if you have that ability. If you have that, I had a teacher a long time ago ask me, "What would you do if you won the lottery?" And I said, "I'd do something good." And she said, "What?" It's like, I don't know, because I haven't been able to put myself in that situation. But imagine the good you can do with X number of whatever.
Yes.
And I think that's what, if you're inclined to be that person, then that's something that I think is worth looking at. And if someone says, "Here's a check for 31 million," I would think you go, I'll take a little 4 million off the top for myself. What can I do with the rest?
Yeah, there you go. And Dak Prescott's a good person, and I say it that way because I think it hit home with him in two scenarios. You remember, what was it, last year, maybe 2 years ago, when Colin Kaepernick and the scenario surrounding him and the kneeling, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Jerry Jones knelt with he didn't kneel. He locked arms with Dak Prescott, right, and I believe Jason Witten and some other players, and kind of tried to show his solidarity with the players. Well, it wasn't more than maybe a day or two that he came back, and he basically kind of pointed at the screen while he was on TV, and he said to his players, "Well, we're not going to be kneeling during the singing of the national anthem." Well, when do you think Colin Kaepernick was kneeling? He was kneeling during the singing of the national anthem. But Jerry Jones changed his mind because of what? Money. I believe that this is my belief.
Influence, sure.
I believe the influences of money, AT&T and others. AT&T is the name of the stadium. They paid him what, $300 million just to put their name on his building out there, and other sponsors, other season ticket holders. They influenced Jerry to say to his players, "You will not stay inside the stadium. You will come outside. You will stand up. You will put your hand over your heart, and you will put your 2 feet on the white line, and you will stand." Dak Prescott was standing right there. He had to know, after Jerry locked arms with him and came back maybe a day or two later and said, "You players, I got you. You will do what I say." He intimidated them. Okay. Stretching up to now, Dak Prescott just had to sign what? That tender.
The tender, right.
Franchise tender, because he found out that Jerry Jones don't want to negotiate with him to give him the money that he probably deserves to get and wants to get. That's why they couldn't get a contract signed. So Dak Prescott learned the lesson. Just because you lock arms with this guy who is trying to butter you up, you understand what I'm saying? Jerry Jones,
yes, definitely.
is all about Jerry Jones. He don't particularly care about you when it comes to the business of his business, his brand. So you better go out there and take care of yourself. Dak Prescott learned a lesson, and he's trying to take care of business.
If it's in his best interest, he'll align with you. If it's not, and most businessmen are like that, unfortunately. That's the society we live in, unfortunately.
That's what you call business. That's what you call business. But I still say that I think Dak Prescott learned a lesson from that moment when Jerry locked arms, and he thought everything was peachy with he and Jerry, and Jerry was going to automatically give him what he wanted from a contractual standpoint. It don't work that way. It don't work that way. Jerry can't own a helicopter and a $250 million yacht if he were to give every player, including you, what they wanted to get.
Right.
Now, Dak's going to get what he wants. I mean, there's no way around, you know, how much more can he get? Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 million more on his basic contract if he has a good year. So in my mind, 31 million ain't bad in the first place. You're going to get a little bit more than that, but hey, come on, 31 million per year.
It's 31's not bad. 36 is better.
That's about it right there. Take it. You can get it.
Well, if you can get it, take it. Exactly. Well, my question has been during this thing, and I don't want to get sanctimonious about it, but I've said it a few different times. If you're going to kneel, okay. If you're going to stand, fine. But the question is, when the lights are out and you're at home watching the game at home with no one else there, and the anthem comes on, what do you do then?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If no one else is watching, do you kneel? Are you still in solidarity with them, or do you stand up and put your hand across your heart? Or you sit on the couch and open up a beer and eat some munchies? That's always the question I ask.
There you go.
Do you really, are you believing in what you're doing, or are you just doing it because someone else sees?
Well, that's the question these young guys have got to ask now. We'll see how many players throughout the league. For me, it's going to be extremely important and monumental for me to see what Dallas Cowboy players, and I keep harping on this Dallas Cowboy players because I was a former Cowboy player. I know, well, I shouldn't say I know what happens out here, but I know the Cowboy fans, what they believe in here. They're really on the side of the players. They most of them, okay. But you have to know that there are many Cowboy fans who don't appreciate anybody who suggests, as Drew Brees unfortunately has said, that anything you do that suggests you're not for the flag and the Army. I got into a huge argument with a friend of mine who has passed away. His mother had a problem with me because I was pretty much for players kneeling. She didn't particularly like it because she was an Army person, and anything that's Army is all about the flag in her mind. Sure. Okay, I appreciate that. But that's not what players were kneeling about.
Right.
It wasn't about the flag or the Army. Hell, I've been in the Army. I understand and know what that's all about. That's not what the players were kneeling about. And I'm sure there are many players throughout the league today that have people that have been in or are in the armed forces right now. But I'd like to see what these players are going to do on the Dallas Cowboy roster if and when the season starts and the flag or the national anthem is being played. Who's going to kneel? We'll see.
We'll see. Well, this has been fantastic. I appreciate you talking to me. I'm blown away. So I know I said half an hour and we've gone over that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
If any time you'd like to come back and discuss some more things, because I have a feeling we haven't cracked the surface of everything we can talk about. And if you reach Billy Joe Dupree and he says no one's talking to him, I'll talk to him. I definitely will talk to him. So, because, we talk mentorship. We talk, again, living on what has happened before us and understanding teamwork. And we all are a part of the same team. But even as a fan, at least as a fan like myself, I didn't just know the name of the quarterback and a running back and a linebacker. That, to me, you're not a fan of the team. You have to be a fan of the team because they all work together. And to me, that's carried over into life. You know who the janitor is. You know who the parking attendant is. You know the name of your garbage man if you can. You know who these people are because they make the world work. So, the same thing of saying, I don't know, who the tight is. Bring Staubach back. It's like nothing against Staubach, but you got other people. So.
Yeah, absolutely right. Nothing against Roger. I think Roger's one of the best, finest men that ever walked the face of the earth. But that doesn't mean he did it all by himself on the football
and
field.
He knows that.
And I've told him that,
Right.
I've told Roger straight out, if you hadn't thrown some of those wobbly, ugly passes of yours that weren't accurate, I wouldn't have been diving all over the place to catch some of those things. He laughs with me. We have a good time, and it's been a great number of years that I spent with the Cowboys. Cowboys are, they're deep into my heart. A lot of things happened good for me when I came down here, and I've stayed here in Dallas since I retired. My kids were basically raised in Dallas. My two sons, I think my oldest son came down here when he was like 9 and stayed with me. I was in the process of divorcing at the time, but the kids stayed up in Pittsburgh for about a year and a half, and finally decided that the kids would be better off with me. She's since passed away, but the boys, I've always stayed in contact with my kids. My oldest son lives about 35 minutes from here, up north of Dallas. And he works for a real estate company. He has his master's degree. My youngest son lives in Atlanta, just outside of Atlanta. He works for Apple. He has his master's degree, and he has 3 of my grandkids down there. So love my grandkids to death.
That's fantastic.
So,
well, again, thank you very much. And this has just been wonderful. And you spent almost the entire time without mentioning Pittsburgh, so that was good.
Jim Brown is still the best.
Exactly.
He's still the go. Frank,
well,
I appreciate it.
It's been great. Thank you.